The stars had never seemed so bright to Captain Lisa Monroe as she stood on the bridge of the Terra Nova, watching the massive alien ship grow larger on the main screen. 3 months ago, humanity had sent their first signal into deep space. 2 weeks ago, they got an answer. Now, she was about to meet beings from another world. "Captain, they're sending another message," said Lieutenant Pete Johnson from the communications station. His voice shook slightly. Lisa couldn't blame him. Everyone was nervous. "Put it through," Lisa said, straightening her uniform. The voice that came through the speakers was smooth and musical, speaking perfect English through their translation system. "Greetings, humans of the vessel Terra Nova. I am Commander Veltar of the Zephyrian Peacekeeping Fleet. We welcome you to this region of space. Please prepare for docking procedures." Lisa looked at the 2 people standing beside her. Dr. Amy Foster was busy checking her notes about alien cultures. She had studied every piece of information they had about the Galactic Council, which wasn't much. Next to her stood Staff Sergeant Jake Martinez, the Marine who had volunteered for this mission. He looked calm, but Lisa knew he was ready for anything. "This is Captain Monroe," Lisa said into the microphone. "We're honored to meet you, Commander. We're ready to dock." The alien ship was huge. As the Terra Nova moved closer, Lisa could see. It was at least 10 times the size of their vessel. The hull was smooth and white, with strange patterns that seemed to glow softly. Docking ports opened like flowers, and mechanical arms reached out to guide them in. "First time seeing alien technology," Amy whispered. "It's beautiful." Jake said nothing, but Lisa noticed his hand resting near his sidearm. Old habits. She had chosen him for this mission because he was smart and calm, but also because he had seen combat. If things went wrong, she wanted someone who could keep them alive. The docking was smooth. Through the windows, they could see the alien docking bay. It was clean and bright, with several other ships that looked nothing like human designs. Some were round like balls, others were long and thin like needles. All of them seemed to be made of materials that glowed softly. "Atmosphere is compatible," reported Lieutenant Johnson. "They're inviting us aboard." Lisa took a deep breath. "Amy and Jake, you're with me. Johnson, you have the ship. If we're not back in 6 hours, you know what to do." "Yes, Captain. Good luck." The airlock opened with a soft hiss. The air that flowed in smelled clean, like rain on metal. Lisa stepped through first, followed by Amy and Jake. The alien docking bay was even more impressive up close. The walls curved upward into a dome that showed the stars outside. "Welcome, humans." Lisa turned to see 3 aliens approaching. They walked on 2 legs like humans, but they were taller and thinner. Their skin was pale blue, and their eyes were larger than human eyes. They wore clothes that looked like they were made of liquid metal, flowing and changing color as they moved. The one in front stepped forward. "I am Commander Veltar. This is Scholar Kethmer of the Valdorian Republic, and War Leader Grixen of our military council." "I'm Captain Lisa Monroe," Lisa said, extending her hand. Veltar looked at it for a moment and carefully shook it. His skin was warm and smooth. "This is Dr. Amy Foster, our cultural specialist, and Staff Sergeant Jake Martinez, our military liaison." Veltar's eyes moved to Jake, and Lisa saw something she didn't expect. The alien seemed amused. "A military liaison? How interesting." "We were told humans have conflicts among themselves." "We do," Lisa said carefully. "But we also have rules about how we conduct ourselves during conflicts. Jake is here to explain our military customs and laws." Kethmer, the scholar, made a sound that might have been laughter. "Laws about warfare? How quaint. You must live very peaceful lives to need such things." Amy stepped forward. "Actually, we find that having clear rules helps prevent unnecessary suffering during conflicts. We have something called the Geneva Conventions that outline proper treatment of prisoners and civilians. The three aliens exchanged glances. Grixon spoke for the first time. His voice was deeper than the others. You have rules about how to fight wars? Are your enemies so weak that you can afford such luxuries? Jake finally spoke, his voice steady. It's not about the strength of our enemies, sir. It's about maintaining our humanity during difficult times. Veltar nodded slowly. Humanity. Yes, we have heard this word in your transmissions. You seem very concerned with remaining ... human. It suggests you have not faced true adversity. Lisa felt a chill. These aliens weren't just curious about humans. They were judging them, and their judgment was that humans were weak. She could see it in their posture, hear it in their voices. They thought humans were children playing at being adults. Perhaps, Veltar continued, you would like to see our ship? We can discuss your application to join the Galactic Council. As they walked through the corridors of the alien ship, Lisa listened to the conversations around her. The aliens spoke to each other in their own language, but their translation devices picked up some of it. Words like primitive and sheltered kept coming up. Amy was asking questions about Galactic Council membership, while Kethmer explained the requirements. Jake walked silently, but Lisa could see his eyes taking in everything. The security systems, the layout of the ship, the number of crew members they saw. Your species shows promise, Veltar was saying. You have technology, intelligence, and, most importantly, you seem to have a natural inclination toward order and law. This makes you ideal candidates for membership. Many species in the galaxy are quite violent and unpredictable. It's refreshing to meet a people who have learned to control their aggressive impulses. Lisa wanted to correct him, to explain that humans hadn't learned to control their aggressive impulses so much as they had learned to channel them. But something told her to wait. Let them think what they wanted to think. For now, the tour ended in a large conference room with a view of space. As they sat around a table that seemed to be made of crystallized light, Veltar smiled at them. We look forward to learning more about your people, Captain Monroe. Your species may be exactly what the galaxy needs. A people who choose law over violence, order over chaos. It's quite admirable. Jake caught Lisa's eye and gave her the slightest nod. He had seen what she had seen. These aliens thought humans were harmless. The next morning, Dr. Amy Foster found herself in what the aliens called the Knowledge Chamber. It was a round room with walls covered in floating screens that showed information from across the galaxy. Scholar Kethmer had invited her here to begin what he called cultural exchange sessions. Kethmer was different from Commander Veltar. Where the military commander was formal and careful with his words, the scholar was curious and talkative. His pale blue skin had darker markings around his large eyes, and when he was thinking hard, those markings seemed to glow softly. Please, sit, Kethmer said, gesturing to a chair that formed itself out of the floor. I am most eager to learn about human civilization. Your people fascinate me. Amy sat down carefully. The chair adjusted itself to fit her perfectly. We're eager to learn about your people, too. The Galactic Council sounds amazing. Oh, it is, Kethmer said, settling into his own chair. Thousands of species, all working together for peace and prosperity. But tell me about humans. Your history. Files mention something called warfare. This is when different groups of humans fight each other, yes? Yes, unfortunately. Humans have fought wars throughout our history. Kethmer leaned forward. But you said yesterday that you have laws about these wars, rules about how to fight. I find this very curious. Could you explain? Amy pulled out her tablet and showed him some documents. These are called the Geneva Conventions. They're international laws that govern how wars should be fought. They protect civilians, medical personnel, prisoners of war, and cultural sites. The alien scholar studied the documents, his large eyes moving quickly across the text. His head tilted to one side, like a bird trying to understand something strange. "These rules," he said slowly, "they prevent you from attacking non-combatants?" "That's right. Civilians should never be targeted in warfare." "And you cannot harm those who surrender?" "Correct. Prisoners of war have rights. They must be treated humanely." Kethmer was quiet for a long moment. Then he made that sound that Amy had learned was alien laughter. "Forgive me, Dr. Foster, but this seems very inefficient. If you are fighting an enemy, why would you not attack their support systems? Their families? Their resources?" Amy felt uncomfortable. "Because they're innocent. They're not soldiers." "But they support the soldiers, do they not? They build the weapons, grow the food, provide the motivation for fighting?" "Well, yes, but—" "And these prisoners," Kethmer continued, "why keep them alive? They are your enemies. They will fight you again if released." Amy tried to explain. "It's about maintaining our humanity, about being better than our worst impulses." Kethmer's markings glowed brighter. "Humanity again. This word seems very important to your people. But tell me, what happens if your enemies do not follow these rules? Then we ... We still try to follow them ourselves, though it's harder. Even if following these rules means you might lose the war." Amy hesitated. "We believe that some things are more important than winning." The alien scholar sat back in his chair, and Amy could see him processing this information. After a moment, he smiled. It was a gentle, almost pitying smile. "Dr. Foster, I think I understand now. Your species has been very fortunate. You have lived in a peaceful part of your galaxy, with only other humans as enemies. You have never faced true existential threat, have you?" "What do you mean?" "You have never encountered an enemy that wanted to completely destroy your species. An enemy that would kill every human, burn every human world, erase every trace of human culture. If you had faced such an enemy, you would not have the luxury of these moral rules." Amy felt a chill. "Have you faced such enemies?" Kethmer's expression grew serious. "Oh, yes. The galaxy is full of species that show no mercy, follow no rules. The Korthik swarm, for example. They consume entire worlds, leaving nothing alive. The Shadow Fleet appears without warning and turns planets into glass. The Devourers eat the populations of entire star systems." He leaned forward again. "This is why the Galactic Council exists, Dr. Foster, to protect species like yours. Species that are too pure, too moral to defend themselves against true evil." Amy wanted to argue, but something in Kethmer's tone made her pause. He wasn't being cruel. He genuinely believed he was being kind. "Your people will make excellent citizens of the Council," he continued. "You have intelligence, creativity, and most importantly, you have these moral restraints that prevent you from becoming like the monsters we fight. You will be valuable allies in our peaceful endeavors." "What about our military capabilities?" Amy asked. "Sergeant Martinez represents our armed forces." Kethmer waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, I'm sure your military is adequate for dealing with other humans. But against real threats? Against species that have evolved for warfare, that know no mercy or restraint? Your rules would only handicap you." Amy felt her face getting warm. "Our military is quite capable." "I'm sure they are, within the limitations you've placed on them. But consider this. You have rules against certain weapons, do you not?" "Yes, chemical weapons, biological weapons, some types of explosives." "Why?" "Because they cause unnecessary suffering. They're inhumane." "There," Kethmer said, pointing at her. "You see? You have weapons that would be effective, but you choose not to use them because they are inhumane. This proves my point. You are too moral for your own good. Amy tried a different approach. What about your species? Do you have similar restrictions? Kethmer's expression grew sad. We used to. Before we met the Korthik swarm. Before we lost 17 worlds to the Shadow Fleet. After you see entire populations consumed alive. After you watch children turn to ash by enemies who laugh at your mercy. You learn that morality is a luxury that not all species can afford. He touched one of the floating screens, and images appeared. Earned worlds, empty cities, battlefields covered with the remains of beings Amy couldn't identify. This is what we fight against, Dr. Foster. This is why we need species like yours. In the Council, to remind us of what we're protecting. To show us that there are still peoples in the galaxy who can afford to be good. Amy stared at the images. They were horrible, but also somehow unreal, like scenes from a movie. Your people are precious, Kethmer continued. You must be protected. The galaxy needs species that still believe in rules, in mercy, in treating enemies with kindness, even if such beliefs are impractical. As Amy left the knowledge chamber that day, she felt troubled. The aliens seemed to think humans were weak, naive, sheltered. They spoke about humanity like adults talking about children who had never faced the real world, but something about it didn't feel right. The way Kethmer had dismissed human military capabilities. The assumption that humans had never faced real threats. The idea that moral rules were signs of weakness rather than strength. She needed to talk to Jake Martinez. Something told her that the aliens were making a very dangerous mistake about humanity. Jake Martinez sat in the alien mess hall, eating something that tasted like chicken but looked like purple jelly. Across from him, War Leader Grixon was explaining Zephyrian military tactics, while Commander Veltar listened with interest. Strike fast and hard, Grixon was saying. Total destruction of enemy capability within the first few hours. No warnings, no negotiations. Complete surprise. Jake nodded politely. Shock and awe tactics. We've used similar approaches. Veltar looked surprised. You have? But I thought humans preferred diplomatic solutions. We do, when possible. But sometimes diplomacy fails. Dr. Amy Foster joined their table, looking troubled. She had been spending most of her time with the scholar Kethmer, learning about galactic history. Jake could tell something was bothering her. How are the cultural exchanges going? Veltar asked Amy. Very educational, Amy said carefully. Kethmer has been showing me records of various galactic conflicts. It's quite sobering. Grixon leaned forward. The galaxy is a dangerous place, Dr. Foster. Your people are lucky to have lived in such isolation. Most species learn about warfare through necessity, not choice. Jake put down his fork. What do you mean? Your conflicts, Grixon explained, are between members of your own species. You fight other humans. This means you can afford to have rules, to show mercy. When you fight creatures that want to eliminate your entire species, such luxuries become impossible. Amy caught Jake's eye. They've been asking about our military laws. The Geneva Conventions. Ah, yes, Veltar said. These fascinate me. Rules about how to conduct warfare. It suggests your people have never faced true existential threats. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. What makes you think that? Kethmer appeared at their table, carrying a tray of the purple. Food. Sergeant Martinez. Perfect timing. I was just discussing human military history with Dr. Foster. Perhaps you could clarify something for us? I'll try. Kethmer sat down and pulled out a device that projected images in the air above the table. These Geneva Conventions, they prevent you from targeting civilians, correct? That's right. And you cannot harm prisoners who surrender, correct? You cannot use certain weapons, even if they would be more effective? Jake hesitated. We have weapons that are banned by international law. Yes. The four aliens exchanged glances. Grixon spoke first. But why? If these weapons would help you win battles, save the lives of your own soldiers, why not use them? Because, Jake said slowly, they cause unnecessary suffering. They're inhumane. Veltar tilted his head. Inhumane. You keep using this word. But you are fighting enemies who want to kill you. How can any effective weapon be considered too harsh? Jake looked at Amy, then back at the aliens. Something in their expressions made him realize they genuinely didn't understand. The Geneva Conventions exist to prevent war crimes. War crimes? Kethmer repeated the words carefully. What does this mean? Jake stared at them. You don't know what war crimes are? No, Veltar said. Please explain. Jake felt like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. These aliens had been treating humans like children, like a species too weak and naive to understand real warfare. But they didn't even know what war crimes were. War crimes, Jake said carefully, are acts that violate the laws of war. Things that are considered too brutal, too inhumane to be acceptable even during conflict. Grixon leaned forward. Give us examples. Jake looked around the table. All four aliens were watching him with curious expressions, like students waiting for a lesson. He realized they had no idea what they were asking. Well, Jake said, choosing his words carefully, targeting civilians deliberately. Attacking hospitals, schools, places of worship. Torturing prisoners for information, using biological or chemical weapons. Destroying cultural sites or historical monuments. The aliens listened in silence. After Jake finished, Kethmer spoke. First, but Sergeant Martinez, these are simply effective military tactics. Why would you call them crimes? Jake felt the world shift around him. Because they're wrong, they're evil? Evil? Veltar looked genuinely confused. But if your enemy's civilians support their military, why not target them? If destroying their cultural sites breaks their morale, why not do so? If torture provides information that saves your soldiers' lives, how is it wrong? Amy spoke up. Because there are some things that civilized beings simply don't do. Grixon made that sound that Jake had learned was alien laughter. Civilized? Dr. Foster, civilization is about survival. About protecting your own people at any cost. These rules you speak of would only help your enemies. Jake realized the conversation had taken a very dangerous turn. The Geneva Conventions aren't just arbitrary rules. They exist because humans created them. We needed them. Needed them? Kethmer asked. Why? And there it was. The question that Jake didn't want to answer. He looked at Amy, who was staring at him with wide eyes. She understood now. They both understood what the aliens were really asking. We needed them, Jake said quietly, because humans are capable of all those things. The war crimes I mentioned, humans have done them. All of them. The silence at the table was complete. The four aliens stared at Jake with expressions that slowly changed from confusion to something else. Something that might have been alarm. Veltar spoke first, his voice careful. You mean humans have targeted civilians in warfare? Yes. Tortured prisoners? Yes. Used weapons that cause mass casualties among non-combatants? Jake nodded. The Geneva Conventions exist because we learned we needed rules to prevent ourselves from doing these things again. Grixon's voice was barely above a whisper. Again? Amy leaned forward. The conventions were created after we saw what humans could do when there were no rules. When we fought wars with no restrictions, no mercy, no limits. Kethmer's skin had gone pale, almost white. But you said these were crimes. Evil acts. They are, Jake said. That's why we made laws against them. That's why we punish soldiers. Who commit them? That's why we spend so much time training our military about proper conduct. Veltar was staring at Jake like he was seeing him for the first time. You mean your species is capable of these acts, but chooses not to perform them? That's right. The rules aren't natural limitations, Amy added. They're artificial constraints we placed on ourselves. The four aliens sat in stunned silence. Jake could see them processing this information, and he could see the exact moment when they realized what it meant. Humans weren't weak. Humans weren't naive. Humans weren't sheltered children who had never faced real conflict. Humans were a species so dangerous that they had to create laws to restrain their own capacity for destruction. Grixon finally spoke, his voice shaking slightly. What did humans do before these laws existed? Jake met his eyes. We call it ancient history. But honestly, some of our worst wars happened after we knew better. The purple food on Jake's plate had gone cold, but nobody at the table was thinking about eating anymore. The alien conference room had never felt so small to Commander Veltar. He sat across from Jake Martinez, with Dr. Amy Foster beside the human soldier. Kethmer and Grixon flanked Veltar, all three aliens struggling to process what they had learned in the mess hall. Sergeant Martinez, Veltar said carefully, I need to understand something. When you say humans have committed these war crimes, you mean your ancient ancestors, correct? Before your species became civilized. Jake shook his head. No, sir. I mean throughout human history, right up to modern times. Amy pulled out her tablet. The Geneva Conventions were first established in 1864, but they've been updated many times. The most recent major revision was in 1977. Kethmer's skin markings were flashing rapidly, a sign of distress that Jake had learned to recognize. But your species has space travel now. Surely you've evolved beyond such behaviors. Commander, Jake said quietly, we had space travel when we dropped nuclear weapons on cities full of civilians. We had computers when we committed genocide. We had television when we used chemical weapons. Technology doesn't make a species more moral. Grixon leaned forward. Nuclear weapons? You have used these against your own people? Twice, in one war, against cities full of non-combatants. The silence stretched for long seconds. Finally, Veltar spoke. Explain to us exactly what these war crimes involve. Give us specific examples. Jake looked at Amy, who nodded encouragingly. Are you sure you want to know? We must understand, Veltar said. If humans are to join the Galactic Council, we need to know what your species is capable of. Jake took a deep breath. Biological weapons. We've created diseases designed to kill enemy populations. Some target specific genetic markers. Others just kill everything they touch. Kethmer made a strangled sound. You have weapons that spread disease? Had. We still have the knowledge, but we've agreed not to use them. The Biological Weapons Convention of 1972 banned their development and stockpiling. But you could make them again, Grixon said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Amy continued the explanation. Chemical weapons are similar. Gases that blind, burn, or kill. Some attack the nervous system, causing paralysis and death. Others cause the lungs to fill with fluid, drowning people in their own blood. The three aliens were staring at the humans with expressions of growing horror. We used these extensively in World War I, Jake added. The results were so terrible that even military commanders began calling for restrictions. Veltar's voice was barely audible. What about the targeting of civilians you mentioned? Surely this was limited to these primitive chemical attacks. Jake shook his head. Firebombing. We would drop incendiary bombs on residential areas, creating firestorms. That consumed entire city districts. Dresden, Tokyo, dozens of other cities. Hundreds of thousands of civilians burned alive. But these were enemy cities, Grixon protested, military targets. Some were. Others were chosen specifically because they had large civilian populations. The theory was that killing enough civilians would break enemy morale. Amy pulled up images on her tablet. This is Dresden before the bombing. This is after. She showed the aliens pictures of a beautiful city, then images of complete devastation. Kethmer stared at the images. How many died? Estimates vary. Between 25 and 35,000 people in Dresden alone. In Tokyo, over 100,000 in a single night. Veltar stood up abruptly and walked to the window showing space outside. And torture? You mentioned torture. Jake's voice grew quieter. Systematic torture for information extraction. Psychological torture designed to break prisoners mentally. Medical experiments on prisoners of war. Sometimes we called it research. Medical. Experiments? Kethmer's voice cracked. Amy answered. Testing diseases on prisoners. Surgical procedures without anesthesia. Freezing experiments. Chemical injections. All documented, all deliberate. Grixon had gone completely still. How long ago was this? The medical experiments I'm thinking of were about 80 years ago. But torture for information? That's happened in conflicts as recent as 20 years ago. Veltar turned back to face them. 20 years? But that's practically yesterday in galactic terms. Humans have long lifespans. For biological beings, Amy said. Some of the people who committed these acts are still alive. The room fell silent again. Jake could see the aliens struggling with this information. Everything they thought they knew about humanity was crumbling. There's more, Jake said reluctantly. Genocide. The systematic extermination of entire populations. Based on race, religion, or ethnicity. How many? Veltar asked. Millions. In some cases, tens of millions. Not just killed in battle, but deliberately hunted down and executed. Men, women, children. Entire family lines wiped out. Kethmer was shaking now. But why? What could possibly justify such actions? Nothing justifies them, Amy said firmly. That's why they're called crimes against humanity. But humans committed them anyway. Fear, hatred, political power, resources, sometimes just because they could. Grixon finally found his voice. The cultural destruction you mentioned? Libraries. Burned, temples destroyed. Historical sites leveled. Sometimes by accident during fighting, but often deliberately. Erase a people's culture, and you erase their identity. Jake leaned forward. Do you want to know the worst part? We kept records, detailed documentation of everything we did. Photos. Film, written reports. We studied the most efficient methods of killing. We improved our techniques. Veltar sat down heavily. Why are you telling us this? Why reveal such terrible secrets about your own species? Because they're not secrets. Amy said, this is all public knowledge on Earth. We teach it in schools. We have museums dedicated to remembering these events. We made a promise to never forget. Why? Kethmer whispered. Jake met his eyes. Because forgetting would make it easier to do again. The silence that followed was the heaviest Jake had ever experienced. He could see the aliens processing everything they had learned. Their expressions had changed completely from the beginning of their conversation. Where once there had been condescension and amusement, now there was something much different. Fear. Sergeant Martinez, Veltar said finally, these Geneva Conventions you mentioned, are they enforced? We try to enforce them. War crimes tribunals, international courts, sanctions against violating nations. And do they work? Jake hesitated. Sometimes, not always. Humans are very good at finding excuses for breaking their own rules when they think it's necessary. Grixon spoke in a voice that shook slightly. What happens when humans decide the rules no longer apply? Jake looked out at the stars visible through the conference room window. We call it total war. And when humans fight total war, the only goal is to make the enemy cease to exist. The aliens exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They were beginning to understand that humanity's membership application to the Galactic Council might not be the simple matter they had assumed. They were dealing with a species that had created rules to contain their own monstrous capabilities. The question now was whether those rules would be enough. Grixon had not slept since the conversation in the conference room. The Zephyrian war leader stood in his private quarters, staring at intelligence reports about human military capabilities that he had requested from the ship's database. Everything he read made him more uncomfortable. A soft chime announced a visitor. Commander Veltar entered, followed by Scholar Kethmer. Both looked as troubled as Grixon felt. "Have you reviewed the human data?" Veltar asked. "Yes, it's worse than we thought." Grixon activated a holographic display. "Look at this. Nuclear weapons deployment in something they call World War II. They didn't just use them once. They built thousands of them." Kethmer's skin had lost all color. Thousands? For use against whom? Each other. During what they call the Cold War, humans had enough nuclear weapons to destroy their entire planet dozens of times over. Veltar studied the display, but they didn't use them. No, they came close several times, very close. There are records of incidents where single individuals made decisions that prevented global nuclear war. The three aliens stood in silence, contemplating the implications. Finally, Veltar spoke. "We need to talk to the humans again. We need the complete picture." An hour later, they sat again with Jake Martinez and Dr. Amy Foster in the conference room. This time, the atmosphere was entirely different. The aliens no longer looked at the humans with condescension. They looked at them with caution. "Sergeant Martinez," Veltar began carefully, "we've been reviewing your species' history. We need you to explain something to us." "You mentioned that. The Geneva Conventions prevent humans from using certain tactics. What happens when those conventions don't apply?" Jake exchanged a look with Amy. "What do you mean?" "When humans fight enemies who are not bound by these rules, or when humans decide the rules no longer serve their interests." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "You're asking about unconventional warfare, if that's what you call it." Amy leaned forward. "Jake, they need to understand. If they're going to judge our membership application, they need to know everything." Jake nodded slowly. "When the Geneva Conventions don't apply, or when humans decide they can't afford to follow them, we call it unrestricted warfare." "Give us examples," Grixon said. "Strategic bombing campaigns designed to break civilian morale. Scorched earth tactics where we destroy everything useful to the enemy. Assassination programs targeting enemy leadership and their families. Economic warfare designed to starve populations into submission." Kethmer was taking notes on a device that projected floating symbols. "These are tactics you have actually used?" "All of them. Multiple times." Veltar leaned forward. "What about enemies who cannot be reasoned with? Who will not surrender?" Jake's expression grew darker. "Total war. When humans fight total war, the goal isn't victory. It's elimination." "Elimination?" Amy answered. "Complete destruction of the enemy's ability to fight, to govern, to exist as an organized society. Sherman's march during our Civil War, the bombing campaigns against Germany and Japan. When humans decide an enemy must be completely defeated, we don't stop until that enemy no longer exists as a functional entity." The aliens were silent. Finally, Grixon spoke. "But surely there are limits, lines you will not cross." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to know about lines? Let me tell you about the Mongols. 13th century. When a city resisted them, They would kill every living thing inside it. People, animals, even plants. Then they would dam rivers to flood the ruins, so nothing could ever grow there again. That was your ancient history, Veltar protested. Fine. World War II. When the Germans put civilians in concentration camps, the Allies firebombed German cities full of civilians. When the Japanese used biological weapons in China, we dropped nuclear weapons on Japanese cities. Eye for an eye, but bigger. Amy continued. More recently, when faced with terrorist groups that hide among civilians, some human militaries have adopted collective punishment tactics, destroying entire neighborhoods to eliminate small numbers of enemies. Kethmer's device was projecting symbols faster than ever. But these actions violate your own conventions. Yes, Jake said simply. But humans are very good at deciding when their own rules don't apply. Veltar stood and began pacing. You're saying that these moral constraints you place on yourselves can be removed when convenient, not convenient, when survival is at stake. When humans feel existentially threatened, the Geneva Conventions become suggestions. Grixon leaned forward. What would it take for humans to ignore all restrictions? To fight without any moral limitations? Jake and Amy looked at each other for a long moment. Amy nodded slightly. If someone threatened Earth itself, Jake said, quietly, if humans faced extinction as a species, every rule would disappear. What would that look like? Kethmer asked. Jake's voice became very quiet. Have you ever heard the phrase, nuclear winter? The aliens shook their heads. It's what happens when you detonate enough nuclear weapons to fill the atmosphere with radioactive dust. The planet becomes uninhabitable for decades. Plants die. Animals die. Everything dies, Amy continued. Humans have run computer simulations of global nuclear war. We know exactly how to make our own planet uninhabitable. If we ever decided that dying was preferable to losing, we could take our entire world with us. The silence in the room was absolute. Veltar finally spoke. You would destroy your own planet rather than surrender? Some humans would, yes. We call it the Samson option. Bring down the temple on everyone, including yourself. Grixon's voice was barely a whisper. What about biological weapons? You said you had banned them. Jake nodded. We did, but we kept the research. We know how to engineer diseases that target specific genetic markers. We could create plagues that would kill only certain populations while leaving others untouched. Or, Amy added, plagues that would kill everything. Plants, animals, microorganisms. Turn entire worlds into sterile rocks. Kethmer had stopped taking notes. His device lay forgotten on the table. Why are you telling us this? Because you asked, Jake said. You wanted to know what humans are capable of when the rules don't apply. This is what we're capable of. Veltar sat down heavily. Your species could destroy entire worlds. Multiple worlds. Star systems. If humans ever developed faster than light, travel and decided that another species needed to be eliminated completely, we wouldn't just attack their military. We would sterilize every planet they had ever touched. Amy leaned back in her chair. That's why the Geneva Conventions exist. That's why we teach military ethics. That's why we have courts and laws and punishments for war crimes. Because we know what humans become when there are no restrictions. Grixon found his voice. What do humans become? Jake met his eyes. The most dangerous species in the galaxy. The conference room fell silent again. Outside the windows, stars continued their eternal dance, unaware that three aliens were learning that the universe was a much more dangerous place than they had ever imagined, and that the greatest danger might come from the species that had just politely applied to join their peaceful alliance. The Galactic Council chambers were packed with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. Commander Veltar stood at the speaker's podium, looking out at hundreds of alien faces. In his 30 years of service, he had never felt so nervous about giving a report out behind him. The massive display screen showed the image of a blue and green world. Earth, home to 3 billion humans who had applied for membership in the Galactic Council. Honorable delegates, Veltar began. I stand before you to present our evaluation of the human species and their application for council membership. In the front row, he could see Scholar Kethmer and War Leader Grixon. Both looked as tense as he felt. 3 weeks ago, they had thought this would be a simple presentation, recommending acceptance of another peaceful species. Now everything had changed. When we first met the humans, Veltar continued, we believed we understood their nature. They spoke of rules for warfare, laws governing conflict, and restrictions on weapons. We interpreted this as evidence of a sheltered, peaceful species that had never faced real threats. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Many species had made similar assumptions about their own primitive neighbors. We were wrong. The murmurs stopped. The humans' rules of war exist not because they are too weak to fight without them, but because they are too dangerous to fight without them. Veltar activated the display screen. Images began showing human conflicts throughout their history. Battlefields covered with bodies, cities reduced to rubble, weapons that could level mountains. Humans are not peaceful by nature. They are peaceful by choice. There is a significant difference. He paused as the images changed to show mushroom clouds rising over cities. These are nuclear weapons. Humans developed them during a global war, used them against their own species, and then built enough of them to destroy their entire planet multiple times over. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. Veltar raised his hand for silence, but they did not destroy themselves. Instead, they chose restraint. They created treaties to limit these weapons. They established protocols to prevent their use. They made the conscious decision to step back from the brink of self-annihilation. The display changed again, showing documents. Treaties, conventions, international laws. Every rule humans have created about warfare exists because they have committed acts so terrible that they felt compelled to legislate against their own capabilities. The Geneva Conventions prohibit targeting civilians because humans have systematically murdered millions of non-combatants. Chemical weapons are banned because humans use them extensively. Biological weapons are forbidden because humans developed diseases specifically to kill enemy populations. A delegate from the Korath system stood up. Commander, are you suggesting we admit a species of mass murderers to the Council? Veltar looked directly at the delegate. I am suggesting we admit a species that has looked into the abyss of their own darkness and chosen to impose limits on themselves. How many species can claim such wisdom? He gestured to Kethmer, who rose from his seat. Scholar Kethmer has studied human history extensively. He will explain what we learned. Kethmer approached the podium, his skin markings dim with stress. Honorable delegates, I have spent weeks reviewing human military history. What I found challenges every assumption we make about civilization and morality. He activated his own display. Charts and graphs appeared showing human population growth, technological development, and conflict statistics. Humans have fought over 10,000 wars in their recorded history. They have developed weapons capable of destroying all life on multiple planets. They have created strategies for genocide, tactics for breaking enemy societies, and methods for erasing entire cultures from existence. The chamber was completely silent now. But here is what makes them unique. At the height of their destructive capability, they chose to stop. They looked at what they could become and decided to become something better instead. Kethmer's voice grew stronger. When humans developed nuclear weapons, they could have used them to conquer their entire planet. Instead, They created international laws to control them. When they perfected biological warfare, they could have eliminated their enemies completely. Instead, they banned such weapons entirely. A new voice called out from the chamber. But can we trust them to maintain such restraint? War leader Grixon stood up. That question haunted us as well. So we asked the humans directly, what would it take for them to abandon their moral restrictions? He paused for effect. They told us the truth. If humans face extinction as a species, every rule disappears. They would use every weapon, employ every tactic, destroy entire star systems if necessary to ensure their survival. The chamber erupted in concerned voices. Grixon raised his hand. But consider this. Every species in this chamber would do the same when facing extinction. The difference is that humans have the capability to follow through on such threats. And more importantly, they are honest about it. Veltar returned to the podium. We spent days evaluating whether humans pose a threat to galactic peace. Our conclusion is this: humans are extremely dangerous. But they are dangerous in the way that a trained warrior is dangerous. Disciplined, controlled, and preferring peace while being utterly capable of war. He looked around the chamber at the hundreds of delegates. The question before us is not whether humans are dangerous. They are. The question is whether we want them as allies or enemies. A long silence followed. Finally, the ancient delegate from Balder Prime spoke. Commander Veltar, what is your official recommendation? Veltar straightened his shoulders. Immediate acceptance, with full membership privileges. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Furthermore, I recommend that we offer humans a permanent seat on the Security Council and invite them to contribute to our military defense planning. You want to arm them? Someone shouted from the back. They're already armed, Grixon replied. They've been armed since before they left their home planet. What we're offering is the chance to point that weapon away from us and toward our enemies. Veltar nodded. The Korthic swarm that has terrorized the Outer Rim for decades? The shadow fleet that appears without warning to glass entire worlds? The devourers that consume everything in their path? For the first time in galactic history, we have the opportunity to ally with a species that might actually be able to stop them. He gestured to the display, which now showed the image of Captain Lisa Monroe and her crew. Humans came to us asking to join our civilization. They brought gifts of art, music, literature, and scientific knowledge. They offered friendship and cooperation. But most importantly, they offered protection. They just didn't realize we would need it from them as much as from our traditional enemies. The vote was called. One by one, species after species voted to accept humanity into the Galactic Council. Not because humans were harmless, but because they had proven they could choose to be harmless when it mattered. As the session ended and delegates filed out, Veltar remained at the podium, thinking about his private conversation with Captain Monroe. After their initial meetings, she had asked him what humanity would need to do to prove they deserved membership. In the council, he had told her that humanity didn't need to prove they deserved membership. Humanity needed to prove the council deserved them. Looking back now, Veltar realized the humans had been evaluating the aliens just as carefully as the aliens had been evaluating the humans. And somehow, the galaxy had passed their test. He made a note in his personal log that night. First rule of dealing with humans: be grateful they choose to be the good guys.